Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Tonight, we all turn coat, or at least get to witness the repercussions, which is always sure to be entertaining. So get ready for a gruesome good time that Lilith Gallows likes to call a second betrayal.
She survived. Jezebel somehow survived. There should have been no way. Not after what I'd done to her. But she did. Upon returning home from the hospital, I started planning. It would take a while before I was able to actually enact it, as I was still recovering from my last encounter with Jezebel, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to plan so I could be prepared. A few weeks after I had fully recovered, I finally convinced my parents it was safe for me to leave the house. It was time. Armed with a hunting knife, my father's Beretta 92 FS, some gasoline in a sealed container, a lighter, and a change of clothes, I was headed back to Robinson State Park to track Jezebel down. It wasn't hard. She was right where I knew she would be. She was in the same place that she slaughtered our friends. It was the obvious meeting place, considering everything. She walked up to me, arms extended, as if she was going to hug me, like I was a loved one. I don't know what she was expecting, but I highly doubt she was expecting to be stabbed. And that's what happened, though. I stabbed her, over and over and over, blood soaking my clothes and staining them a deep crimson as more and more blood seeped out of her and onto me. Then I slit her throat and stepped back, watching her limp body fall to the forest floor with a sickening crunch that I assumed was her skull shattering against the altar that she had slit the throats of my friends over just over a month ago. Finally, I pulled out the now loaded Beretta, put it close to her head, and pulled the trigger 4 times, one for each lost friend of mine. The end result was Jezebel turned into a vaguely human-shaped bloody mess of flesh, bone, and organs. After I put the last bullet into her, I holstered the gun and took a minute to breathe. I then made a fire pit out of nearby wood and sticks. I stripped and poured the gasoline on the pile of wood and set it ablaze. Following that, I waded into the nearby lake and dove down, washing the blood off of my body. It was then that I realized that I needed to do something about Jezebel's body, and I forgot a shovel. Glancing around, I saw one leaning on a tree a couple of yards away. I didn't have time to worry about why it was there, so I jogged over, grabbed it, and got to work. About an hour later, I had a hole big enough to cover her up. It wasn't particularly deep, but I didn't really care, as long as it was deep enough to cover her up. As far as I knew, she wouldn't be going anywhere, and she didn't deserve a proper burial. I tossed her in, replaced the dirt, and went home. I tried to put it out of my mind. figuring that dwelling too much on it wouldn't do anybody any good. That night, however, and many nights after, if I'm being honest, I would lie awake late into the night, thinking about everything. I thought that killing Jezebel would give me some closure, but instead of feeling fulfilled, I just felt empty and still hurt, maybe even more so than before, and I couldn't understand why. I had done it, hadn't I? I'd killed the woman who'd broken my trust, broken my friends' trust, and their lives. I'd punished the woman who caused so much harm to my friends and I, and avenged them. So, why did I feel like I'd failed? I suppose, in a sense, I indeed had, considering I ended up concluding that it was the loss and trauma of it all getting to me. I had done what needed to be done, and that was all there was to it. It was over. After that night, I attempted to regain some sense of normalcy in my life, though it wasn't easy. Everyone had heard about what happened that night. Thankfully, nobody was really directly a dick to me about it when school had started, but what happened may honestly have been just as bad. My peers and the adults around me fell into one of two categories. They either tried to be overly nice and friendly to me out of pity, or they outright ignored me and stayed away from me. I'm going to be honest and say I fucking hated it. I hated them all. When it came to the people who pitied me, I appreciated their kind words and such, but the overwhelming pity bordered on the edge of being condescending and infantilizing. As for the ones who avoided and ignored me, in retrospect, I honestly can't really blame them, given the stigma my circumstances had attached to me, but it still hurt to some degree, though I appreciated that, at least, they left me alone. My parents had also gotten me a therapist, believing that I should talk through anything that was going on in my head, related or not, as they believed that bottling everything up inside was a bad idea. But those sessions never really ended up going anywhere. I never really opened up or handled my feelings well before the incident, and I certainly wasn't going to do so with a complete stranger. I honestly wouldn't have been able to if I wanted. Anyway, it wasn't anywhere near as bad as what was to come at the very end of the year, on the last day of school. I'd woken up that day, not with the excitement for summer vacation or graduation like one would expect, but instead with a feeling of dread and foreboding, the source of which I wasn't sure of. I had tried everything I could to stay home that day, even pointing out the fact that I really didn't even need to be there in the first place. However, all my attempts were in vain, so off to the last half day of my educational life I went. And because classes were done, the only thing I could really do was sit in the cafeteria with the other students, doing nothing but using my phone because I didn't really have any friends besides Rusty, the German shepherd my parents had gotten me for emotional support. Finally, 10:45 came, and like all the other students, I bolted out the door. I then started walking home, the feeling of dread still having not dissipated the entire day. And once I got to the end of the road where my house was, I finally understood why. The first thing I noticed was the cop cars. There were a ton of them along my street, so they were rather hard to miss. As I got close to my house, however, I finally saw it. police tape surrounding the house. As I approached one of the officers and asked what was going on, he refused to tell me anything until I mentioned that I lived there. After that, his demeanor changed entirely, and he was about to arrest me until a familiar voice told him to stop. Looking up, we were greeted by Detective Thomas Reynolds, the lead detective on the case last summer. He explained that he had done some preemptive work and could clear me as being a suspect, since I had a watertight alibi. Apparently, as well as the sign-in sheet in the cafeteria, all students had to sign as attendance. Several other students and faculty had also seen me there. It was then explained to me that my parents and younger siblings had been slaughtered, murdered, seemingly with some kind of sharp object that they couldn't quite identify, and mangled almost beyond identification. Feeling overwhelmed, I asked if Rusty was okay at least, when they looked puzzled and asked who Rusty was. I explained to them the situation, and their expressions went from puzzled to grim. "I'll be honest, kid. We didn't see any dog, nor any trace of one. I don't know," the officer said, his voice a mix of solemnness and sympathy. I said I understood, and was told that it would be a while before I could go back inside my house, as they hadn't arrived that much earlier than I had. I acknowledged this and exchanged numbers with Detective Reynolds to let me know when I could go home, and if I could think of any information that would help the investigation. And I started walking to Robinson State Park. I wasn't sure why at first, but I felt almost drawn there, like I'd find answers there. And as I walked, something hit me. I dismissed it at first because the idea was ludicrous, or so I thought at the time. Despite that, however, the thought kept nagging at me. Could Jezebel have something to do with this, somehow? As I walked deeper into the woods, I decided I'd once again go to the spot where everything had happened, where my friends were killed, where I'd confronted Jezebel. Just to put my mind at ease, I'd figured. However, what came next had the complete opposite effect. As I neared the site, something caught my attention. Nailed to a tree at the edge of the clearing, there was what looked like a piece of paper and something else around it. My heart sank when I realized what it was when I got closer to inspect it. It was Rusty's collar. I screamed in despair and fear. That bitch had stolen my dog and done God knows what to him. And I thought that I may never see my buddy, the only friend that I really had, and the only being that I really cared about at that point, ever again. It was then, though, that I thought I heard something. It was faint, but I could hear what sounded like a dog's howl. I couldn't be sure, so I quickly pocketed the note and called out, "Rusty!" And thank God, I heard him bark. I still couldn't identify where he was, though. "Rusty, where are you?" As I tried to follow his barking, a pit grew in my stomach as I realized where it was coming from. Jezebel's burial site. She couldn't have. I started desperately digging with my hands, and soon my hands touched something hard and wooden. I started digging around it, and soon I unearthed a large black wooden box, inside of which was my dog, trapped in his crate, whining and crying, clearly scared. I let him out and hugged him as tight as I could without hurting him, so relieved that he was okay. Eventually, we both calmed down, and I took a closer look at him. He thankfully didn't seem hurt, to which I was relieved to no end. If Rusty had been hurt, I would have been devastated. I put his collar back on him and called the detective. "Hey kid, I was just about to call you and tell you the investigation and cleanup are just about..." I cut him off, telling him about what happened, to which he said that he was on his way. Not too long after, the detective arrived with what I assumed to be forensic investigators. I told them once again what I could, and showed them the note, which I hadn't even read yet. He read it aloud. "Hey, Jack. After our last encounter, I decided I would return the favor. Now that we're even, we should meet up sometime. Smiley face." When questioned about this by Detective Reynolds, I thought about whether I should tell him what happened or not. In the end, I decided that if I told him, I would probably be arrested, so I decided to go against what my morals were telling me to do, and I bluntly lied, telling him that I honestly didn't know what the note was talking about. My genuine confusion and expressions of being upset seemed to convince him that I was telling the truth, because he didn't ask anything more. Instead, he just offered me and Rusty a ride back home, while the other detectives on scene did their thing, an offer I gratefully accepted. When we pulled into my driveway, Detective Reynolds told me to lock my doors and windows, and that the police would be keeping an eye out as well. I thanked him, grateful, and went inside with Rusty, locking the door behind me. After locking the back door and windows and getting Rusty some food, I went into the living room and collapsed onto my couch, physically and mentally and emotionally drained, and I started to cry as I processed everything that had happened. In the blink of an eye, my entire life had changed, and I was completely unprepared for it. I didn't even know what the process was. Thankfully, Detective Reynolds was kind enough to help me with all that, as my parents had no will, and I was the sole living member. I was deemed the next of kin, and everything went to me. I know I'm eventually going to have to sort through everything, but it's going to have to wait. It's been a few months since everything's been situated, and I thought that nothing was going to come out of any of it, just like last time. But I was wrong. This morning, when I went to check the mail and take Rusty for a walk, alongside the monthly bills and junk mail, something stood out to me. An envelope with no stamp or return address. I dreaded opening it, as I knew that the lack of stamp or return address means that it had to have been hand-placed. But as I was opening it, terrified of being another letter from Jezebel, it quickly became apparent that this was not from her. It was a professional-looking letter, complete with a header, footer, properly typed out, and what I assumed was the company logo at the top right corner. It read, "Dear Mr. Brown, on behalf of myself and all of the organization I represent, I would like to extend our deepest condolences for the loss of your friends and family. I can't imagine it's been easy, handling the loss of all those close to you, and all at the hands of the same person, Jezebel Denton. Even after what should have been fatal wounds and being buried, she came for you and your family out of revenge for you, and maybe out of some other goal not yet understood. Yes, we all know about your meet-up at Robinson State Park in September. Rest assured, we have no intention of informing the police or any other potential authority about that incident. In fact, we find your attempt noble and admirable, and we would like to help you. We have our own interest in ridding the public of Jezebel, believe it or not. We would like to offer you access to any and all resources at our disposal, including any and all information we have about her. We would only ask that in exchange, you work for us as an employee. I can assure you that we will pay you well for any and all services you may do for us, and as a show of good faith, enclosed in this envelope alongside the letter is $5,000. Enough for you to get by for a while. If you should be interested, we have also enclosed in this envelope a business card with information you can use to get in contact with us. It is our sincerest hope that you take us up on this offer, as we feel you would be a great asset to us, and us to you as well. Respectfully yours, Sam Brooke, Head Administrator of the Omnis Admin Sector. Just as the letter read, enclosed inside the envelope was not just the letter, but also a business card for this Sam Brooke, as well as a stack of $100 bills that I didn't bother to count. I had no reason to believe that they were lying about the amount. I'm going to deliberate on it a little more, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to call the number on the card and see what this Omnis Institute is all about. I want answers, and this seems to be the best lead I have, and it isn't like I've got anything to lose.
That just goes to show you, if it's too hot in the kitchen, it's best to stay right where you are, because outside, there's likely a fire, and that flame is surely named Omnis. But if you're seeking more gore galore, make sure to return next weekend, and until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications, so I can catch you all again next Saturday.
Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.